I didn't see it coming, but that napkin was the last thing my father would ever hand me with his own hand. I stood there in my mother's dining room in the Meerland part of Houston, 34 years old, one kidney lighter, staring down at 4 words written in my father's shaking cursive. Cynthia's hand found my knee under the table before I even sat back down. She always knew before I did when I was about to do something stupid. Jeffrey, that was all she said. Just my name, low, like a rope thrown to a man in the water. My brother Damien sat across from me in a shirt that probably cost more than my truck payment, grinning like a man who'd just won a door prize. My mother stood at the head of the table with her wine glass still raised, waiting for the room to clap. And it did. Teresa, Damien's wife, clapped the loudest like she was at a pageant. My 16-year-old Candace, sitting next to me, didn't clap. She just looked at the napkin in my hand, then at me, then at her plate. "What report?" I said, not loud. I didn't have it in me to be loud. 9 weeks earlier, a surgeon had cut into my side and taken something out of me that I was never getting back, and I was tired down to the marrow. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. "Not now, son." "You wrote it on a napkin, Dad. Kinda hard to have a big reveal and then say, 'not now.'" My mother set her glass down with a clink that sounded like a judge's gavel. "Jeffrey, please don't do this in front of everyone." "Do what?" "I haven't done anything." I looked at Damien. "Have I done something?" Damien held up both hands, all innocence, like he wasn't the reason there was a banner on the wall behind him that said, "Thank you for saving Dad," in glitter letters that Teresa had clearly ordered off some website. "Hey man, I don't know anything about a report. I just know I raised $41,000 for Dad's recovery and hospital bills, and I think that's worth celebrating." "You raised money," I said. "I gave up an organ." The table fell into that suffocating silence unique to a Houston family gathering right before somebody's grandmother says something she can't take back. My mother's mouth pressed into a thin line. "We are not comparing sacrifices," she said. "That's exactly what we're doing, Mom. You just did it. You stood up and did it with a toast." My father squeezed my wrist again, harder this time, and when I looked down at him, really looked, I saw that his eyes weren't just wet from the wine or the moment. They were scared. My father, who worked 40 years hauling concrete and never once showed fear about anything, including the day they told him his kidneys were failing, was sitting at his own dinner table looking at me like I was a stranger he'd found in his living room. "Dad, what is this?" "Sit down, Jeffrey," he said so quiet only I could hear it. "Please, for me, sit down and we'll talk after." I didn't sit down. I picked the napkin up off the table, folded it once, and put it in my shirt pocket like it was something I needed to keep, not something I needed to burn. Then I looked at my brother one more time, long enough that Teresa stopped smiling, and I walked out of my mother's house without another word. Cynthia caught up to me in the driveway. Candace was 2 steps behind her, already crying because that girl has never once in her life been able to watch her father get humiliated without taking it personally. "What did it say?" Cynthia asked once we were in the truck. I handed her the napkin. She read it twice. "We received a report. A report of what?" "I don't know, Cyn. That's the whole problem. 3 words and a period. And my own father can't look at me." Candace from the back seat, small and furious the way only a teenager who loves her daddy can be furious. "Uncle Damien did something." "I know he did something." "We don't know that," Cynthia said, which was the responsible thing to say and also a lie she didn't believe for 1 second because I could see it in the muscle working in her jaw. I drove us home in silence. 9 weeks of recovery and I still had a pull in my left side every time I turned the wheel too fast. A reminder stitched into muscle that I'd given part of myself to a man who apparently believed a report over his own son. I didn't cry. I want to be real clear about that because a lot of men will tell you they cried in the truck that night and call it strength. I didn't cry. I just drove, and somewhere around the 3rd red light I started laughing. A short, ugly laugh that scared Cynthia more than crying would have. "Jeffrey." "I'm fine." "You are not fine." "I gave a man my kidney and got handed a napkin like I'm being served." "I'm allowed 1 laugh, Cyn." She didn't argue with that. I should back up because none of this makes sense unless you understand what the last year of my life had actually looked like. And it did not look like a man scheming for a fundraiser toast. Welcome back to Dad's Sweet Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, every villain in these stories thought they were the smartest person in the room. They were not. Subscribe so you never miss a story. My father, 61 years old, built like a fire plug, stubborn as a Texas summer, had been on dialysis for 14 months. 3 sessions a week, 4 hours a session, a chair, a machine, a room full of other tired people watching daytime television. I'm an insurance claims auditor. Have been for 11 years. Ever since I decided hauling concrete like my father did was going to put me in a chair like his a lot sooner than 61. It's not glamorous work. I spend my days finding the gap between what a claim says happened and what actually happened. People don't love me at parties when they find out what I do. But I'm good at numbers, and I'm good at noticing when something doesn't add up. And neither of those things saved my father's kidneys. When the transplant coordinator sat our whole family down in a beige little office at the hospital and explained that a living donor match was rare and precious, and that my father's blood type made him a hard case, I didn't wait for anybody else to volunteer. I got tested before Damien even asked when the appointment was. I matched. Damien didn't. Not that he ever went in to check. I've got a business trip, he told me over the phone back when we still talked like brothers instead of 2 men circling each other at a dinner table. Vegas thing, work stuff. I really can't move it. But you should absolutely go ahead and get tested, man. Somebody in this family's got to be a match. Somebody in this family, like it was a raffle and not his own father's life. I didn't hold it against him then. I want to be honest about that too, because it matters for what comes later. I didn't think Damien was a villain. I thought Damien was Damien, a 31-year-old who sold brand consulting to small businesses in the Galleria area and always had a reason he couldn't make it to the things that actually cost something. I loved my brother. I just didn't expect anything from him, which I guess if you think about it long enough is its own kind of quiet insult. The kind you don't notice you're delivering until years later when somebody hands you a napkin. The surgery happened. Left kidney, laparoscopic, 4 small scars I still catch Candace staring at sometimes like she's trying to memorize them. Recovery took 9 weeks. The doctor said 6 to 8, but my body took its sweet time. And there was 1 week in there where a fever spiked, and Cynthia sat up beside my hospital bed until 4 in the morning, gripping my hand so hard I had bruises on my knuckles the next day that had nothing to do with the surgery at all. Damien visited twice, both times for under 20 minutes. Both times he mentioned unprompted this little fundraiser thing he'd started to help with Dad's out-of-pocket costs. It's really taking off, he told me the second visit, scrolling his phone like he was showing me a fantasy football league instead of a web page with our father's face on it. People are being so generous. I think we're going to clear 30 grand easy. That's good, I said, because it was good genuinely, and because I was on painkillers and didn't have the energy to examine why something about his tone made my teeth hurt. I should have examined it. I know that now. The weeks after the dinner were the strangest of my life. And that includes the week I woke up from surgery missing an organ. My mother didn't call. My father didn't call. Damien texted once, a single message with no punctuation that said, "Hope you're doing okay, man. Family stuff is complicated." And I didn't answer it because I was fresh out of patience for a man who thought family stuff was an adequate label for whatever had just happened in that dining room. Cynthia wanted to fight. She's the type steel-spined. Doesn't let a slight sit unanswered for more than a day. "Call your mother," she said more than once. "Ask her what the report said. Make them say it to your face. They'll say it eventually," I told her. People who write things on napkins instead of saying them out loud, they're not hiding a small thing. They're hiding a big one. And big things don't stay hidden. They just take longer to come out. I want to tell you that was wisdom. It wasn't. It was mostly me being too proud and too tired to ask my own family what they thought I'd done. But I didn't disappear either. That's the part that matters. The part that I'd come to understand later was the whole hinge of what happened next. I didn't storm off and never look back the way a man in a movie might, chest puffed righteous. I kept showing up. My father still had a nephrology follow-up scheduled, a formality, A check on how the transplanted kidney was settling into its new home in his body, whether it had accepted my flesh as its own, the way apparently my family had not. I still drove him every single appointment. I'd pull up outside my parents' house in the mornings, and he'd come out slower than a man his age should, and he'd get in the passenger seat of my truck. And for the first 3 appointments after the dinner, he didn't say a single word to me beyond "thank you" when I opened the door and "see you next time" when I dropped him back off. I never once asked him about the napkin. I know how that sounds. Cynthia thought I was being stubborn, and Candace thought I was being a martyr, which, teenage or not, might have been the most accurate read in the house. But here's the truth of it. I wasn't waiting for an apology. I was waiting for the truth to fall out of the sky on its own the way it always does when somebody's been lying long enough. Because lies are heavy, and eventually the person carrying them gets tired of holding the weight. I just didn't expect the truth to come from a hospital billing office. Her name was Monique, and she'd been a transplant floor nurse for going on 9 years. And she'd taken care of my father through both the initial workup and the surgery itself. And somewhere in those long hospital hours, she and I had developed the kind of easy rapport you get with somebody who's seen you at your absolute worst. Hooked to an IV, groggy, asking the same question 3 times because the anesthesia hadn't cleared out yet. I ran into her in the hospital hallway on one of the follow-up visits, maybe 5 weeks after the dinner. My father was in with the nephrologist. I was in the waiting area doing what I always did in that hospital, which was staring at nothing and thinking too much. Mr. Thornton. Monique dropped into the chair next to mine, tired in the specific way nurses get tired, like the exhaustion has soaked into the bone. How's the kidney treating you? Or, I guess I should ask how it's treating him. Behaving itself from what they tell me. Good. She hesitated, glanced down the hall, then back at me. Can I ask you something? And you can tell me it's none of my business. Go for it. There was some kind of complaint filed against the transplant program a couple months back. Compliance had us all in a meeting about it. Donor coercion allegations, financial motive stuff, the whole 9 yards. They interviewed half the floor. I never heard the name attached to it. They keep that part locked down tight, but the timing was right around when your dad had his surgery. And She shook her head. I don't know. It stuck with me. You seemed like the last guy on earth who'd need money bad enough to pressure his own father into a transplant. A sudden chill moved through my chest like a gear snapping into place. Financial motive, I said slowly. Meaning somebody told the hospital I only donated because I needed the money. I mean, I'm not supposed to know details, Mr. Thornton, and I definitely shouldn't be telling you this much. Monique, please. She looked at me a long moment, then made a decision. The kind good nurses make 100 times a shift, weighing what a person needs against what the rule book says. The complaint mentioned a fundraiser. Said the family had already raised money for the surgery costs independent of insurance, and that a family member donor specifically may have pushed for the transplant to happen so he could access some of those funds afterward under the guise of recovery expenses. I sat completely frozen. I didn't know it yet, but I was looking for the first time at the actual shape of the thing that had been done to me. Who filed it? I asked. I genuinely don't know. It came in anonymously through the hospital's ethics line. That's all I've got. I thanked her. I meant it. And then I sat in that waiting room chair for the better part of an hour running the math the way I ran every claim that crossed my desk, looking for the gap between what a story said happened and what actually happened. And for the first time since the dinner, I understood that the gap wasn't around me. It was around Damien. Here's a thing I know from 11 years of auditing insurance claims. People who are stealing money almost never look like they're stealing money. They look busy. They look generous. They look like the most helpful man in the room. The one organizing the fundraiser. The one everyone's toasting. I didn't confront anybody. I want to be clear about that because pride tells you to march into a room and demand answers. And pride is usually wrong about the timing. Instead, I did what I do for a living. I started pulling threads. The fundraiser had been public, a page on one of those donation sites. Help beat kidney failure. Damien's face smiling out from the header photo like he was the one who'd had surgery. $41,000 raised according to the toast at dinner. I went and looked at the page myself. It was still up, still accepting donations, 6 weeks after my father's surgery, 6 weeks after the kidney was already inside him doing its job. Total raised, $43,200. Total listed as dispersed to the family, 0. The page still said, funds being held in escrow pending final medical bills. I called my father's hospital billing office directly, something Damien, as far as anyone could tell, had never once done, and asked as the documented living donor and a listed emergency contact for an itemized summary of what insurance had covered versus what remained out of pocket. The out-of-pocket total after insurance, after every scan and every overnight stay and every follow-up appointment for both my father's transplant and my own surgery, came to $11,400. $43,000 raised, $11,400 needed, $30,800, sitting in an account my brother controlled 6 weeks. After the surgery, it was supposedly 4. Sat in my truck outside the billing office with that number, glowing on my phone screen, and felt the air leave the vehicle entirely. My chest went entirely numb. I didn't call Damien. I called a man named Whitfield. Whitfield had gone to high school with me. Not a close friend, but the kind of Houston-adjacent acquaintance you keep because you run in overlapping circles for 20 years. And now he worked as a compliance officer for one of the big regional banks, the kind of job where his whole professional life was built around asking one question. Where did this money actually go? I need a favor, I told him over the phone. And I need you to tell me if it's a favor you're even allowed to do. Depends on the favor. If somebody set up a public fundraiser and the account was tied to a personal bank account instead of a registered charity, is there any way to find out where withdrawals from that account actually went? Not the fundraiser platform, the actual bank. Whitfield was quiet a second. That's not really my lane, Jeffrey. That's more forensic accounting. But depending on the platform, sometimes the payout account info is semi-public. If the organizer ever posted an update with account confirmation, some of these platforms make you verify. You'd be shocked what people post without thinking. How would I even look? Send me the link. I sent him the link. 2 days later, Whitfield called me back, and I could hear in his voice the specific tone of a man who has found something he wishes he hadn't. Okay, so this isn't anything official. I want to say that up front. I just did some digging on stuff that's technically public record and some math that anybody could do if they had the patience. Whitfield, your brother's business, the consulting thing. It's called Thornton Brand Solutions, right? Right. It filed for a small business relief loan about 8 months ago, $14,000. And there's a lien against it from a supplier out of Sugar Land for non-payment, filed about 4 months back for a little over $9,000. He exhaled. Jeffrey, your brother's business was underwater before your dad ever got sick. The world seemed to sharpen around me. A sudden clarity replacing the confusion as a fact landed that changed everything. You're telling me, I said slowly, that my brother started a fundraiser for our father's medical bills while he was drowning in his own business debt. I'm telling you the timing lines up close enough that if I were still in my old fraud investigations job, I'd be very interested in that fundraiser account. I'm not saying he did anything. I'm saying the numbers are sitting right next to each other in a way that makes a compliance guy nervous. I thanked him, hung up, sat in my kitchen with Cynthia across from me, watching my face the way she watches storm clouds, waiting to see if it's going to pass over or come down on the house. Talk to me, she said, so I told her everything. The complaint, the $43,000, the lien, the loan, all of it laid out on our kitchen table like evidence because that's what it was. Cynthia sat back in her chair. For a long moment, she didn't say anything at all. He accused you, she said finally, of pressuring your father into a kidney transplant for money while he was sitting on $31,000 that wasn't his. Looks that way. That report, the one on the napkin, that wasn't a coincidence, Jeffrey. That was timed. I know. He needed you to look guilty right then, right at the dinner, right when the toast happened. So nobody would ever ask why the money hadn't moved. I looked at my wife across that table, and something that had been sitting in my chest for 6 weeks, a low-banked kind of anger, the kind that doesn't roar, just smolders, finally caught a little air. "I'm not going to yell at him," I said. "I'm not going to give him a scene to twist into something else. He wants a villain. I gave him plenty of material tonight at that dinner already. Standing up, storming off. That's not what's going to bury him. Then what is? The truth. Just laid out flat where everybody can see it. That's all I need. I didn't rush it. That was the hardest part, patience, when every animal instinct in me wanted to drive to my mother's house and put that lien filing on the table in front of my father's face. But I'd learned something in 11 years of claims work. You don't show your hand until the story is airtight. Because a man like Damien, cornered too early, doesn't confess. He improvises. And Damien was good at improvising. He'd been improvising his whole life, so I kept driving my father to his appointments. Every single one. The truck rides during those first few weeks were thick with a heavy, suffocating silence. But he finally started talking to me again around the 7th week after the dinner. Small talk first, football, whether the Astros had any pitching left in them. Nothing that touched the actual wound between us. I let him ease into it. I never once brought up the napkin. "You don't ask me about it," he said to me one morning out of nowhere, staring out the passenger window at the strip malls going by. "The report." "No, sir. Why not?" "Because you'll tell me when you're ready. And because I already know I didn't do whatever it said I did, so I don't need you to confirm it. I need you to figure it out." He went quiet after that. But something in his shoulders eased just slightly, like a man setting down a bag he'd been carrying too long. Around the 8th week, Monique found me again in the same waiting room, and this time she didn't hesitate. "They opened a formal inquiry," she said, voice low. "Someone at the hospital connected the ethics complaint about you to a separate red flag from Patient Financial Services. Apparently, your father's account had been contacted by an outside party asking for documentation to submit for reimbursement from a private fundraiser, and it didn't line up with actual charges. Compliance is looking at it now. I probably shouldn't be telling you any of this. You keep saying that and keep telling me anyway." She almost smiled. "Yeah, well, I liked how you handled your dad through all this. Not everybody handles family the way you did." I didn't tell her what I already knew about the lien or the loan. I let the hospital's own compliance office do what it was built to do, because a lawsuit or accusation coming from me would look like exactly what Damien had already accused me of, a man with an agenda. But an institution finding the same rot on its own, that doesn't look like revenge. That looks like the truth catching up to a man who thought he'd outrun it. Weeks after the dinner, the same 9 weeks it had taken my body to recover from the surgery, which felt like the universe closing some kind of loop, my mother called me. I almost didn't answer. Cynthia was the one who nudged the phone toward me. "Answer it," she said. "Whatever this is, you want to hear it live." I picked up. Jeffrey. My mother's voice was different than I'd heard it in months. Smaller. "Can you come over tonight? Your father wants to talk to you about the report." A long pause. About everything. I drove over that evening with Cynthia beside me and Candace in the back because my daughter point-blank refused to be left out of whatever was about to happen. And honestly, at that point, I didn't have the heart to argue with her. My mother's house looked the same as it had 9 weeks earlier. Same porch light, same wreath on the door that never came down regardless of season. Except this time, nobody had put up a banner, and there was no toast waiting, and Damien's car was not in the driveway. My father opened the door himself. He looked older than he had at the dinner, which didn't make sense given how much time had passed, except that it made all the sense in the world, because guilt ages a man faster than any surgery ever could. "Come in, son." He said it quiet, and for the first time in 9 weeks, he looked me dead in the eye when he said it. We sat in the living room. Me, Cynthia, Candace, my father, my mother, and on the coffee table between us, my father set down a manila folder, worn soft at the corners like he'd been carrying it around in his hands for days, opening and closing it. "Working up the nerve. I need you to know I didn't want to believe it," he said. "Any of it. Believe what, Dad?" He opened the folder. Inside was a printed email, an official hospital compliance letter addressed to my parents as the primary patient and policyholders on file, informing them that an internal investigation into the ethics complaint filed against me had concluded, and that the complaint had been found to be unsubstantiated, and more damningly, traced back through an IP address associated with a business account registered to Thornton Brand Solutions. I read it twice. Cynthia read it over my shoulder and watched the final piece of the puzzle drop into place. Damien filed it. My father said the words came out of him like they cost him something physical to say. Your brother filed a false ethics complaint against you. Said you pressured me into the surgery for the insurance payout and access to the fundraiser money. He filed it the week before the dinner. I think—" He stopped, started again. "I think he filed it so that if anybody ever looked too close at where the fundraiser money went, there'd already be a story out there that made you look like the greedy one. He wanted the suspicion pointed somewhere else before it ever had a chance to land on him." "You knew," I said, not a question. "I found out 3 days ago. The hospital called your mother directly, since the accused party, you, is also the donor and listed emergency contact. I've known for 3 days, Jeffrey, and I have not slept one night through since." "And the money?" My mother's hands were shaking now in her lap, and she wasn't looking at either of us. "There was a bank auditor," she said. "A compliance thing from I don't even understand all of it. Something about the small business loan and a lien." She looked up at me sharply. "How do you already know that part?" "Because I did the work myself, Mom. Nobody handed it to me on a napkin." A profound, heavy weight settled into the room after I said that. I watched it land on my mother's face like a slap she couldn't return. My father closed the folder. His hands, I noticed, were shaking too. "Your brother owes $31,000 to people who thought they were helping save my life," he said. "He owes a supplier in Sugarland. He owes a small business loan he can't cover, and instead of asking his family for help, like a man, he took money raised for my surgery. And when he got scared somebody would look too close, he pointed a finger at the son who actually gave up a piece of his own body to keep me alive." "Where is he?" I asked. "Tonight?" "We told him not to come," my mother said, and her voice cracked clean in half on the last word. "We told him we needed to talk to you first." I sat back on that couch, and for a second, just a second, I let myself feel something close to satisfaction. The cold, clean kind that doesn't need to shout to be real. "I'm not interested in an apology from him," I said. "I don't want him to explain himself to me. I want the hospital's compliance office to keep this on record permanently. So, if he ever needs a transplant referral or a character reference or anything else in this town that touches a hospital, there's a paper trail showing exactly what kind of man he is. I want the bank to pursue whatever they're going to pursue on that lien. And I want the fundraiser shut down and every remaining dollar returned to the donors who thought they were helping you, Dad. Not held in some account for Damien to bail out his failing business." My father nodded slow like each nod cost him. "And us?" my mother asked quiet. "What about us, Jeffrey?" I looked at her a long moment. I thought about the toast. I thought about 9 weeks of silence and a napkin and a room full of people clapping for the wrong son. "You stood up in front of the whole family and thanked the wrong person for saving Dad's life," I said. "You didn't even wait to hear if there was another side to the story before you let him hand me a folded napkin like I was some kind of suspect at my own father's dinner table. I gave up an organ, Mom, and your first instinct when a lie showed up wasn't to defend me. It was to believe it. Jeffrey, I'm not finished." My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I'm glad the truth came out. I'm glad Dad's kidney is doing fine, and I'm glad I'll never have to wonder whether I did the right thing giving it to him, because I know I did. But I am done being the son who shows up quiet and grateful while somebody else gets the toast. I'll keep showing up for Dad's appointments because that's not about you or Damien or anybody's version of the story. That's between me and him." I looked at my father. "But this family, the way it operates, where somebody can lie about me to my father's face and get a standing ovation while I get a napkin? I'm done pretending that's normal. I'm done coming to dinners in this house." My mother's face crumpled. "You're not going to forgive us?" "No," I said. "I'm not." Cynthia's hand found mine, steady, the way it always was. Candace beside me didn't say a word, but I felt her shift closer like she was standing guard. "I'll take Dad to his appointments. I said, standing up. "I'll make sure his kidney, my kidney, keeps doing its job. That's not up for negotiation because I don't do half a job on anything, including this. But the toasts, the dinners, the family theater where somebody gets to be the hero for money he stole, and I get accused for the organ I actually gave. That's finished. You can have Damien's version of this family. I'll take mine. It's been a while since that night, and I won't pretend everything wrapped up clean because real life doesn't hand you a bow at the end the way a courtroom drama does. The hospital's compliance office kept the finding on record. Whitfield told me secondhand that the bank did eventually flag activity on Damien's business account tied to the fundraiser withdrawals, and that a formal fraud complaint got filed by 2 of the original donors once words started getting around. Not from me. I never posted a word of it anywhere. But Houston is a big city with a small memory and people talk. Damien's little consulting business folded within the year. Last I heard, he'd moved out to a suburb on the far side of the county and stopped coming to family gatherings altogether, which suited me fine because I'd stopped going to those gatherings myself. My father and I never talked about the napkin again after that night. He didn't need to apologize with words. He apologized the only way that ever mattered to me. By driving himself, slow and stubborn, to his own follow-up appointments once his strength came back. Because he told me once, quietly, that he didn't feel right making me spend 1 more minute in that hospital parking lot than the debt he already owed me demanded. That was as close to "I'm sorry" as my father was built to get, and I took it because I'd learned by then that some men only ever pay you back in actions, never in speeches, and you have to decide whether that currency is good enough. My mother calls sometimes. I let it go to voicemail more often than I answer. There's no version of that relationship I'm interested in rebuilding on the old foundation. Not after watching how easily she raised a glass to a lie instead of asking a single question first. As for Damien, I never saw him again after that night in my parents' living room. Not once. No confrontation. No final scene where I got to watch his face fall. No dramatic showdown. Just silence and a business that folded and a name that stopped coming up at family dinners because there weren't any family dinners left for it to come up at. Some people wanted a bigger ending out of me. Teresa asked once if I was ever going to really let him have it, like there was a scene somewhere I still owed everybody. A shouting match, a public unraveling. I told her the same thing I'll tell you now. I didn't need to destroy my brother with my own 2 hands. I just needed to stop protecting him with my silence and let the truth do what truth always eventually does to a man who builds his whole life on borrowed money and somebody else's suffering. I gave my father a kidney, 9 weeks of recovery, 4 small scars, 1 napkin that I still keep folded in the drawer of my nightstand. Not because I need reminding of what was done to me, but because I need reminding of what I refuse to become in return. Loud, desperate, chasing an apology I was never going to get. I got something better than an apology. I got the truth laid out flat where everybody could finally see exactly who I'd always been and exactly who my brother had always been underneath that fundraiser smile. And I walked away from that family with my dignity fully intact and both my kidneys' worth of proof that I never needed their toast to know what I'd done was right.